This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to make a video talking about my 2020 reading goals, which is not something that I've done in the past, in part because the Gregorian calendar is a construct invented by some popes like 500 years ago, but also because I guess, if anything, I am more into making week by week productivity to-do lists and am less inclined to make long-term, far-reaching yearly goals that I'm probably not going to meet just because it all feels kind of arbitrary and rigid to me. So none of the goals that I'll be talking about today are super concrete or prescriptive or based on numbers in any way, shape, or form. Instead, I'm just trying to reflect and think about the ways that I can manifest a better reading year in 2020. Because as I mentioned in my favorite books of 2019 video, my reading overall last year was pretty mediocre and unsatisfying, especially compared to my reading from 2018, which was pretty fantastic. And so I've been looking back at my Goodreads logs from both years, trying to figure out what accounted for that difference in quality and why I felt so uninspired for much of 2019. Because it really was a year of just half-heartedly dragging myself through books and then getting to the end of it and not feeling super excited about picking up anything new. And in looking at 2018 and 2019 side by side, the biggest thing I noticed is that there's a lot more coherence and continuity to my reading choices in 2018. In 2018, I can see clear patterns and kind of chains of books that follow a particular topic or author or theme. For example, in 2018, I read a lot of Japanese literature and novels by Japanese Americans. That year, I also read a lot of books translated from Korean. I read several books by Eileen Chiang, who became a favorite author that year. And I also read several books that I would say fall under the umbrella of disaffected millennial woman or disaffected woman in her 20s. And all of those clusters of interconnected books are testament, I think, to the fact that I was really excited and engaged by what I was reading in 2018. And it helped me fall into this wonderful rhythm of letting one great read lead you into another great read over and over again. I love when books help contextualize each other and when they're in conversation with each other, and when reading books side by side kind of enriches and deepens your experience of each text on its own. And in 2019, I just had a lot less of that. I think at most I had a handful of pairs of books that were in conversation with one another. Books like Milkman and Say Nothing, or Into Thin Air and Into the Wild, but that's about it. I just never really hit a topic or an author or a group of books that lit a fire in my reading the way that so many books from 2018 did. And so in 2020, I just want to be smarter and more intentional about the way that I'm choosing the books that I want to read. I want to be actively thinking and reflecting about what I'm curious about and what I want to learn this year, and I want to kind of try to seek out lesser known books that are related to what I'm currently reading in hopes of kind of setting off one of those reading streaks and getting into a great groove and rhythm of reading. And so basically, in terms of thinking about my reading goals for 2020, I've really just been thinking about topics and authors that I'm hoping to explore this year. And this isn't meant to be a hard and fast TBR list. It's more a kind of collection of topics and ideas that I want to keep in mind as I go throughout the year, and that I hope will lead to some fruitful and inspiring reading experiences in 2020. First up, I want to read Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell series. My mom loves these books and has been telling me to read them forever, and I've had her copy of Wolf Hall on my bookshelf for God knows how long. And even though historical fiction isn't really my bag, particularly like 16th century Tudor history, these books are so acclaimed and everyone is so excited about the release of The Mirror and the Light this coming March, and so I figured that now is as good a time as any to kind of jump on this bandwagon. And this might sound like an odd comparison, but I'm really hoping that my experience of reading these books will be very similar to my experience reading Robin Hobb's fantasy for the first time, i.e. a literary genre trilogy that I resisted for a long time because I thought I wasn't interested in the subject matter, but that I finally read on the basis of many, many rave recommendations. And what I found with Robin Hobb is that it's really, really cool when an author based purely on the strength of their writing and storytelling and character building, can make you care about a world that you thought you didn't give like two licks about. Speaking of Robin Hobb, one of the great revelations of 2019, despite it being a mediocre year overall, was reading her Live Ship Traders trilogy and realizing that I could really enjoy epic fantasy. And not just enjoy, I truly loved those books. And so in 2020, I want to kind of continue challenging my own assumptions about what genres I like or don't like. In terms of fantasy, I'm definitely going to keep reading more Robin Hobb. I think next I'll probably go back and read her Farseer trilogy, starting with Assassin's Apprentice, because I believe that's technically the order you're supposed to read them in anyway. And then I was thinking tentatively that maybe this is the year that I will give some hard sci-fi a try and maybe even explore some mystery, thriller, crime fiction, which, to be honest, are the two genres that I usually have less than zero interest in. But I was thinking about trying out The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu, which came highly recommended from a friend. And I've also been contemplating Ted Chiang's sci-fi collection Exhalation, which I've heard rave things about. And I'm also a big fan of Arrival, which is a movie based on one of his short stories that I have not read. And then on the mystery, thriller, crime fiction end of things, I was thinking about giving Tana French a try, just because, again, she's an author I've heard great things about. And if anyone has recommendations on where to start with her stuff, please let me know. And if you have any recommendations for any of these genres, I'm obviously open to suggestions. Speaking of trying new things, if you want to make 2020 the year of learning new skills and exploring your creativity, I recommend that you check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes for curious people looking to explore their creativity, discover new passions, and develop their skills in areas like illustration, graphic design, web development, film and video production, creative writing, lifestyle and productivity, and much more. I think the thing that surprised me most about Skillshare is how many cool lifestyle classes they offer. Classes about candle making and basic knife skills and how to take care of your houseplants. I recently took a class called Style Your Space, Creative Tips and Techniques for Interior Design, because I recently moved and have been trying to get settled into my new space, so I was looking for some tips and tricks about thrifting and vintage pieces and how to kind of compose a space in a way that reflects your sense of style and the way that you want to live. Each class includes projects that will help you grow and develop your creativity. Most classes are under 60 minutes, meaning that you can incorporate them into your busy schedule, and Skillshare is also one of the most affordable ways to learn something new, with annual membership coming in at less than $10 a month. And if you click the link in the description box below, you'll get 2 free months of premium membership on Skillshare and the opportunity to explore everything that Skillshare has to offer. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Shifting gears a little, one area that I want to explore more in my reading in 2020 are books by and about Native Americans or people indigenous to North America. I'm currently reading The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890 to the Present by David Treuer, and it is excellent so far. I'm only about a quarter of the way in, but it's one of those books where every paragraph and every detail that he recounts is so rich in humanity and history and feels like a potential jumping off point for a whole other book or story. And so reading it has really made me want to pull together a list of novels and memoirs and other nonfiction histories about all the many different groups and people who comprise Native America. One of those books is Savage Conversations by Leanne Howe, which recounts in part the hanging of 38 Dakota people in Mankato, Minnesota in 1862, which remains the largest mass execution in US history. And I'm also hoping to read more Richard Wagamese this year. I read Indian Horse a couple of years ago and loved it, so I'm hoping to start with those and kind of build out a broader TBR list from there. Another area that I would like to read more deeply into are books about the American West. I love the American West, both as an actual physical place and as an idea. I think the mythology about the American West can be incredibly seductive, and I've enjoyed reading books with a critical eye that either perpetuate that romanticism about the region or that seek to actively dismantle it. I'm thinking about books that I've read, such as Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey, or some of Joan Didion's many writings about California. And one of the books I want to read this year is Wallace Stegner's Where the Bluebird Sings to the Lemonade Springs, which is a collection of his writings about the American West. Some other books about the West that I'm hoping to look at this year are American Babylon by Robert O. Self, which is a history of Oakland, California, John Muir's writings about the Sierras, and Cadillac Desert, which is a book that Jennifer over at Insert Lit Pun recently recommended on her channel. And I'm also wistfully hoping that 2020 will finally be the year that I read John Steinbeck's great California classic, East of Eden. Speaking of modern American classics, one of the authors whose work I want to explore more of this year is Toni Morrison. The only book of hers that I've read so far is Beloved, but I have The Bluest Eye on my bookshelf and I have Sula downloaded on audiobook. So hopefully those will get me off to a good start on that one. Moving further afield, this year I would also like to read some more books about the Balkans and Bosnia in particular. I've read a couple of books specifically about the fall of Yugoslavia and the Bosnian War and its aftermath, and one of the books that I am hoping to read this year is a volume of poetry called Sarajevo Blues by Semezdin Mehmedinovic, which was written during the siege of Sarajevo in 1992. But this year I'm also hoping to find some books about that region that aren't focused specifically on that conflict, either books that were written before the war, such as The Bridge on the Drina by Ivo Andrić, or books written long enough after the war that they're not primarily focused on that. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I read a lot of Japanese fiction in 2018, and I'm hoping to potentially get back to that a little bit in 2020, especially because at the time in 2018, I had all of these grand plans to read a bunch of Japanese classics, books like The Makioka Sisters by Junichiro Tanizaki or Kokoro by Natsume Soseki, or just more Kawabata because I read Snow Country and really loved it. But I never actually got around to any of those books, so maybe this is the year that I'll circle back to them. Speaking of classics, there's also a part of me that has been like, what if 2020 is the year where I just read some of those big, long, satisfying classics? Maybe books like In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, which I tried to read once as a buddy read with a friend, and then we both completely failed and have literally never spoken of it since. I've also been wanting to read The Possessed by Elif Batuman, which is a book about reading her way through the Russian classics, so I kind of have this idea in my head of what if I read that book and then it inspires me to finally get around to reading Tolstoy or Dostoevsky or some of the other Russian greats. I've also technically said that I'll read Moby Dick as part of a reading group that my friend has put together, so ideally I'll follow through on that. Obviously I'm not going to get to all of these books this year unless something absolutely bizarre happens, but I've been trying to think about it because I do think it would be fun and really satisfying to kind of knock out a couple of those big ones this year. And lastly, one thing that I've been thinking about doing this year, but that I'm probably most hesitant to do, is reread the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante. And to be honest, the only reason I'm thinking about doing this is that I really want 2020 to be the year when I finally make a review of the Neapolitan novels, which is literally one of the reasons that I started this channel 2.5 years ago, and I still haven't done it. I think I've just been so intimidated by the thought of the task that would be that I've put it off long enough that at this point I would probably need to go back and reread the series to do a good review of it, which is stupid because I read those books like 3 years ago and it's a huge time commitment. So I don't know if I'm actually up for that, but I also really do want to get that review done this year, so I think I maybe just need to think more about the best way to go about doing that. There is also a new book out that I just saw at the bookstore last week called The Ferrante Letters, which I guess is a collection of letters and criticism about Elena Ferrante's novels, and I'm intrigued to read that, so maybe I could pair that with some type of reread or abridged reread of her books. I don't know, we'll see. But that could also be a fun way to kind of anticipate the release of her new novel, The Lying Life of Adults, in June. So yeah, those are my 2020 reading plans / goals, so to speak. I realize now that this is a kind of rangy and random and probably unrealistic set of books and topics that I currently think I'm interested in. But again, I think I'm just trying to identify things that could potentially set me down some exciting and enriching and rewarding reading pathways this year. So let me know if you have any 2020 reading recommendations for me, especially if they fall into any of the categories mentioned. I'd also be really curious to hear about your 2020 reading goals, plans, or resolutions, and how you go about formulating those. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!